The Legend of Zelda is...
Legend? Wait for it.
Nintendo's most storied and story-driven franchise. It seems the greater the game, the harder time I have writing about it for this show, because I have no idea where to begin. What can be said that hasn't been said, and are words even enough to capture the magic of these games?
Would you please let me suck it out?
Absolutely.
Sometimes it's hard to tell whether Mario or Zelda had the greater impact on the industry and the culture of gaming. Surely Mario is more of a household name, but within the global gaming community, I feel Zelda is more revered. Mario may have been the first fully realized project, but it was still a side-scroller with segmented levels. Zelda was the first time we were just given an avatar and let loose in a virtual world. Zelda left just as many, if not more, influences in the field of game design. Open worlds, item-based progression, lock-on targeting, optional content, the eternal triad of exploration, combat, and puzzles. Even something as fundamental as saving was invented to accommodate the original, which was considered really big at the time. It defined, redefined, and re-redefined the adventure game. And if you're still not convinced, here's a few quotes from the creators of the most commercially successful entertainment product in history. So if this series is so perfect, and so revered, and so...
Wait for it. Keep waiting.
What the f*** am I doing? Why am I making a video about my wish list? Why do I even have a wish list? I should have no complaints and no wishes. Well, I was never more hesitant with the choice for this show than Zelda, because I thought there was really nothing I wanted to change about it, and I don't want anything to interfere with their natural artistic vision. The one wish I did have was the same as everyone else, a huge open world, and we f***ing got it. So what else could I ask for of what is invariably called the greatest game of all time? Well, after playing through its historic catalog once again, it turns out a lot.
That sucked!
Let's start with these two. Please port these. These please port.
Please, please, please. That's 5 pleases.
What is taking so long? Are you just trying to put as much space between the Wii U release and the inevitable Switch release? Because I don't care, I want them now. Nobody got the Wii U release because nobody got the Wii U.
I can't go on like this!
After rumors and a sly remark from Anuma-san, Skyward Sword became the last 3D Zelda to get a touch-up, and it needed it more than any other. Normal controls, QOLs, shut the fuck up. The thing is finally playable.
That was the longest tutorial stage ever.
And of course, Ocarina and Majora. These two already got 2 awesome remakes and are a primary reason I return to my 3DS once every year or 2. And I love my Majora's Mask 3DS, and I don't ever want to storage that thing until I'm storaged. We're going out together, me and that thing. And I can't imagine they'd make another pair of remakes so soon, but that depends how Grezzo developed them. If they took the source code from the originals and up-res them to 3DS specs, then just up-res them further to HD and reconfigure the interface. They already run at 60 frames and are the greatest pair of games to ever grace the earth. So as much as I love going back to this, I'd buy the fuck out of this. The only 2D Zelda to ever get a makeover was Link's Awakening. In fact, it kinda got 2. And that last one is a beauty. And I'm glad I wasn't the only one who immediately thought about the possibility of Oracle remakes in the same style. They were all Game Boy Color titles, so they could just use the same engines and assets. They're both some of the more unique Zelda games, and they all star the same incarnation of Link from the era of Light and Dark. Oh, and we'll all buy the fuck out of it. How many more reasons you need? A Link to the Past, like most SNES games, is an obvious no. I mean, this thing holds up perfectly. Not a single flaw, not even a single design aspect considered dated. It could have been released today as an indie. Minish Cap is also 16-bit and quite beloved for its gorgeous pixel art, so I could see the argument against it, but I'd buy the fuck out of it. Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks. Okay, now the conversation begins. These are 2 of the more unique and quirky Zeldas, but also the most unplayable. Those touchscreen controls and chunky DS graphics are a bigger nightmare than the bosses of Link's Awakening. I don't think a remake would cut it. I think full reimaginings would finally do this pair of games justice. Lastly, the original. I don't know about this one. It could use it more than any other, but it just don't feel right. It's a piece of history. Although, if they did give it some sort of zero mission treatment, as well as The Adventure of Link,
There'd be no more war!
the 2D Zeldas are awesome and I love them. But I always wish that once 3D was established, they would just phase them out. Top-down overgames were essentially 2D games trying to simulate the illusion of a 3D space. So why keep both concurrent? Maybe because they're simpler and quicker to develop, offer a slightly different gameplay style, and are popular due to the nostalgia factor. But still, I can't help but wonder how awesome Link's Awakening would have been if it was just fully reimagined as a full-fledged Zelda experience.
You asshole!
But hey, that's cool. 2D and 3D can coexist. I just pray to Hylia that they don't subjugate into the 2D games the classic formula.
Oh, it's just some poor bastard's corpse.
As fun, masterful, and refreshing Breath of the Wild was, I really hope that the classic Zelda formula is not dead.
Okay, now let's hear that formula.
Okay, so you're this guy, right? Let's call him Zelda.
It does say that, you're right. But using basic logic and human intelligence, one can surmise that this is a Link. Never call me by that name again!
Starting at home, you acquire a sword and shield, and receive some call to adventure, like save Hyrule or wake the Windfish. You explore the overworld until you reach the first dungeon. After the first 3 dungeons, a major climax in the story occurs, like discovering Hyrule was flooded, or it's all just a dream. This is also accompanied by a major gameplay change, like time traveling, or a parallel world, or shape-shifting on demand. You continue to explore the overworld and beat the other 3 to 6 dungeons, which this time offer a different set of quest trophies. Then there's another major story event, usually a twist, like Sheik was just Zelda in disguise, or Zelda was in that old amber, followed by an epic final boss battle, and most often an ending left open to follow-up games.
Damn, son! I want a triangle! Classic!
And that is the classic Zelda formula.
Total classic!
It's a beautiful, rhythmic, story-driven recipe, and the farthest they've strayed from this before Breath of the Wild was Majora's Mask or Wind Waker, but even those felt more like traditional Zelda gameplay. Breath of the Wild was an experiment in reinventing the wheel. It still felt like a Zelda game, with the added appeal of, whoa, Nintendo made a big, modern, open-world game, and it's fucking Zelda.
Which, by the way, is nothing like the kick-ass world of adventure I hoped for.
But there were many changes and omissions to the classic formula that I never expected or wanted. The climactic gameplay alterations, the item-based progression, the delicate balance of dungeons and overworld, and the seamless way these things intertwine. Even little things like pieces of heart. The classic formula of Zelda all rely heavily on item-based progression, which Breath of the Wild completely did away with in favor of the new breakable weapon system. There has to be a way to remedy this, I hope. There has to be a way to balance the classic formula with the open air, like weapons-based items like bows and boomerangs stay on the new system, but obscure items like the hookshot and spinner are given as dungeon items and are needed to access certain areas of the world. Also, don't give 4 major items within the first hour of the game. Spread them out!
But these skills and gear are kinda whack!
Ever since the 3rd entry, Zelda games have almost always featured some form of duality to the world. The Dark World, past and future time periods, Twilight, even the Silent Realms. Not all of the entries featured alternate worlds, like Majora, Wind Waker, and Link's Awakening, although I honestly think Koholint and Termina are parallel worlds, so I don't hold Breath of the Wild's comparable lack of one against it. I just hope they're not gone forever.
To another world!
But at the same time, that's not to say there aren't elements of Breath of the Wild I'd love to see become standards. The huge open world, the jump button, the cooking system, foraging, upgrading, customization. I can see them being exclusive to that one title, being that one of its major themes is survival, but they're far more fun and satisfying and broad and realistic than literally just cutting the grass. Additionally, more can and should be implemented over time. Video games in general grow and augment over time, and there are lots of things that can be added to Zelda games. Some for a single title and others to become a permanent fixture. A crafting system building on Breath of the Wild's index, a hard mode that isn't locked behind a paywall, and a post-game that takes place after the ending and doesn't just reload at the last save point.
Better cough up that formula or else!
They could blend both designs together like this, or they could just do open-air Zelda from now on, or they could do a classic-style game once in a while. I don't know what this part of the future is gonna look like. The classic formula is part of Zelda's identity, and I'm just not ready yet to say goodbye.
I cannot!
You can say that it's merely a narrative structure that can be overused like anything, but it works, and I love it. And I want them to retain a significant portion more of it than they did in Breath of the Wild. However, even if they do lay most of the classic formula to rest in Kakariko Graveyard, there's one thing that must make a non-negotiable return. Just as everyone had the same wish for an open world, everyone seemed to have the same complaint about the dungeons.
No more dungeons!
The dungeons in Breath of the Wild are not dungeons. The divine beasts were awesome to see in the world, but they were not dungeons, and I had more fun controlling them in Age of Calamity. They were disappointingly easy, they were remarkably short, they all had the same objectives, they were all mechanical animal colossi, and there were only 4. And the bosses sucked. The 4 Ganon Blights were obviously as similar in vanilla as the so-called dungeons they guarded, but even the overworld bosses grew stale after a while. They can sprinkle in as many Hinox and Lynels as they want, it gets boring and you get too good at fighting them. Hyrule Castle, it was awesome, but it was a freeform area that just felt less like a dungeon and more like any other part of the seamless world. And storming it was way more exciting than the actual showdown it was leading up to.
I bet if a serious dungeon crawler saw how we were doing it, they'd laugh their asses off.
And then there's the shrines.
This is supposed to be a low-level dungeon.
Most of them were fun, and most of the shrine quests were fun too, but I'm not crazy about them. I get that they were supposed to serve as both warp points and snack breaks from the huge open world, and I understand that Breath of the Wild as a whole was more about the overworld than the dungeons, but I would have taken half as many shrines and even a slightly smaller world for some actual dungeons.
And if I could trade you in for a special ability, I would have done it a long time ago!
So what exactly is a dungeon? Is it underground? Must they always come with dragons? Do we really have to crawl through them? In video games, dungeons come in many ideas. In The Legend of Zelda, dungeons are massive, complicated, self-contained levels with their own routine that fit within the classic formula, like peanut butter and chocolate, mac and cheese, anjou and cafe, a perfect symbiosis. Anuma is a master dungeon designer. When he became captain of the series on Ocarina of Time, his main role was creating the dungeons. And he recently exposed the equation behind the classic Zelda dungeon. But I'm gonna talk about it anyway.
Wait for it. Keep waiting. Keep waiting for all of eternity.
Okay, so you enter a dungeon and explore around, defeating enemies and solving puzzles to gain keys that open other rooms to defeat more enemies and solve more puzzles. Eventually, you acquire a map revealing the layout of the place and a compass pinpointing unopened treasure. Halfway through, you are confronted by a mini-boss. When defeated, Link is awarded a type of item known as gear or equipment. These items expand Link's repertoire of abilities, and are essentially mechanics used to solve puzzles and fight enemies. The item is then used to complete the remaining half of the dungeon, which includes finding the boss key. Dungeon bosses are typically massive, malevolent monsters with which an epic battle takes place. The newfound item is used to exploit the boss's weakness, thus rendering them vulnerable to many sword slashes.
Stabbed in the eye.
When defeated, the boss leaves behind a heart container to expand Link's health gauge by 1. Finally, Link is bequeathed the one reason he entered the dungeon in the first place: the quest trophy, which is used to drive the story forward. When the dungeon is cleared, the mechanical item obtained is used to reach a formerly inaccessible section of the overworld and locate the next dungeon. When a set of quest items is complete, a major story event occurs.
Total classic!
Some of the best dungeons are intricately built around a central objective that the whole thing leads up to. Dungeons had all kinds of themes, and these themes would inform the architecture, bestiary, and puzzle design. Lots of them were temples, but those temples had themes. Lots of them were based on the natural world, but that's still key. I want more dungeons based on plausible locations. The Snow Peak ruins, the Sand Ship, a haunted house dungeon in the Lost Woods, or a pyramid dungeon in the Lanayru Desert. At the same time, I want more crazy weirdo dungeons like the Stone Tower Temple and Ancient Cistern. These are some of the most unique and well-designed in the entire series. Some of the best dungeons are the ones with a story behind them, and most dungeons surprisingly have one, if not all. They just need to be decrypted. Stone Tower is a reference to the Tower of Babylon. Shadow Temple is a royal mausoleum converted into a torture chamber. The Tower of the Gods is just one big trial. And of all the dungeons with a story or theme or objectives, the best ones are the classic location dungeon. Dragon Roost Cavern is Death Mountain. The Forbidden Woods is the Kokiri Forest. City in the Sky is probably Skyloft. Or just good old Hyrule Castle. One of my favorite Zelda moments was the Temple of Time in Twilight Princess. Of all the temples that played host to dungeons, the holiest one in Hyrule finally got its turn. I would love if they made dungeons out of other classic locations or even places long spoken of but never seen, like the Temple of Light. We got our open world, but we lost our dungeons. Come next Zelda game, we better get both.
I'm Mappy the map.
Hola, I'm Gypsy, the GPS.
Don't know why we need a GPS when we already have a map.
As nice and fitting as Breath of the Wild's soundtrack was, it left me really underwhelmed. Most of it was made of soft piano passages sprinkled over great lengths of silence. I understand it was meant to represent the solitude of nature and the brooding emptiness of the ruins, but this is how a real Zelda game sounds like. Another treasure Breath of the Wild just threw away like yesterday's pumpkin soup was instruments. Nearly every entry since Link's Awakening has bestowed Link with a magical, mechanical, musical instrument where every melody was not just lovely, they were integral gameplay elements. Call your horse, raise the sun, teleport across the map, all kinds of things Link could do just by playing a song. Now if you want to do those things, bring back musical instruments, and maybe even use melodies you never thought of using before. Before I get to my final topic, here's a quick list of miscellaneous Zelda stuff that I really want.
Bitch, don't you want to start making some real fucking money?
Okay, those pins of the 8 instruments of the sirens, don't make some cool shit like that and then pull the limited time contest winner bullshit.
It's the asshole!
More of those Dark Horse books. I don't know of what, they're just so cool, I want more. Maybe a sheet music collection? Twilight Princess manga all in one. Also Skyward Sword and Wind Waker manga. A film series or an anime series? What do you think would be better? Replicas of quest items, which of course leads me back to these, which of course leads me to musical instrument recreations like the Ocarina of Time, which I own, it's awesome! A life-size replica of Majora's Mask, which I can cross off the list. Thanks, first 4 figures. Actually, uncross, can you re-release the big resin model? Stuff for my dog to make him look like Wolfling. Stuff for me to make me look like Wolfling. Skull Kid and Midna for the next Smash Brothers. A third and final piece to the Triforce of crazy, weird, non-canonical crossovers? maybe LOZ RPG?
You know what I'm saying?
And finally, a Hylian hoodie. I really like it and I want one. I don't care if I'm gonna look like an old lady from an impoverished country in Eastern Europe, I fucking want it.
You should be making some motherfucking money.
The timeline. The many legends of Zelda. When Hyrule Historia first came out, I was so relieved. And if you're like me, you notice something after the first read. There are quite a few blanks to fill, a few legends yet to be told. Now, I don't discuss my ideas for story on this show because, again, I don't want to interfere with their artistic vision, and that goes triple for Zelda. But I'm about to bend that rule. All I'm gonna do is speculate where other games could go and what they could be about based on what we already know.
But just to clarify, you do what now?
Damn it!
For a long time, Ocarina held the title of chronologically first, but it was usurped by Skyward Sword, and the time will come again when another prequel will claim the crown. It could explore the backstory of Hylia, because it still feels like she was kinda just shoehorned into the series, reach far back enough to make a prequel that expands the lore of the creation myths. There's also several ancient tribes like the Uka and the Twilight that could use some more clarification. The era of chaos would make for a great game. Amidst the conflicts surrounding the Triforce, this incarnation of Link helps Rauru seal the Sacred Realm by collecting the 7 whatevers and helping construct the Temple of Time. Maybe this is the perfect opportunity for that Temple of Light dungeon. Between the return to the surface after the events of Skyward Sword in the Sky era, and the sealing of the Sacred Realm in the yet-to-be-a-game events of the Era of Chaos, is this hyphen. This is one of the things not included in the Encyclopedia timeline, but I feel like there's no reason to have included it in that original Historia one if they didn't plan on putting something there. How about a game that introduces the Sacred Realm into the world, the era that it was opened, only to be closed in the next one? The era of prosperity is completely unwritten. All that is known is that this is when the Kingdom of Hyrule was founded, so what could a game like that be about? The Hyrulean Civil War seems like a good prospect at first glance, but it's too closely tied to the events of Ocarina considering the newborn hero of time is given to the Great Deku Tree near the war's end. Unless they complete the Triforce of Hyrule Warriors games. How awesome would a direct prequel to Ocarina be? Of all the Links, I still feel closest to the Hero of Time, although it couldn't feature him, or any Link for that matter. As we all know, Ocarina diverged into 3 alternative timelines. In the era of decline, Link loses to Ganon, who is then sealed by the 7 sages in the Sacred Realm, which he corrupted into the Dark World. This is known as the Imprisoning War, and it too could make for an interesting game. It could be the perfect spot for a game where we finally play as Zelda, where she goes around gathering the sages for the sealing, even disguised as Sheik, because it's the same incarnation of Zelda. It could also show Zelda/Sheik's side of the story during Ocarina of Time, during the 7 years that Link was asleep. Seriously, how have they not made this game yet? Another empty space is the Gold Era. It's merely the backstory provided by Adventure of Link, but it could make for a very interesting game. Why would the royal family use the Triforce, and why does it lead to the decline of Hyrule? Is this what led to the revival of Ganon, setting the stage for the original Zelda game? Only a new game set in this era can answer these very cool speculations. As for where they can take this timeline, I think they're at a big a loss as me. They've done a great job beefing up the middle of it through the years, but as for what happens after Zelda 2, I don't know. It's the only numbered sequel in the whole series, so maybe they could round it out with a trilogy by making Zelda 3, Demise of Ganon. Where the first 2 were about the Triforces of Wisdom and Courage, maybe this one could be about power, and finally bringing all 3 pieces back together after ages of separation. And as the original timeline, it can also be an outlet for the 2D games, since that's all it features anyway. The Child Era is about as Zelda gets. This is probably the best one. It's heavily centered around the Hero of Time, who appears in both main entries. And if you literally look between the lines, there is a line. Another hyphen. Between Majora and Twilight, I'm perfectly fine with this timeline featuring a third spooky Zelda. I am so down for a full-blown horror-themed Zelda swarmed with Poes and Redeads and that haunted house dungeon I mentioned, and where they can take this timeline is also open to creativity. Finally, the adult era. It's about as un-Zelda as it gets. Sailing, training, and cel-shaded graphics. I'm not saying it's bad, I still love it, I'm just saying it's very untraditional Zelda. So because of that, this is the one where they can get super experimental and go even further outside the confines of fantasy. I recall the devs once saying they wanted to drop the fantasy theme for a steampunk theme or something related to technology rather than magic. New Hyrule is the perfect candidate for such a setting. Futuristic Zelda, sci-fi Zelda, cyberpunk Zelda, steampunk Zelda, horror Zelda, there's all kinds.
Some kind of fantasy world with medieval-style culture.
These are just things that I can think of based on information we already have. Nintendo can create games I couldn't even imagine. In fact, that's a big thing I really want. Some of the best Zelda games are the weird ones. The ones where you're not exploring Hyrule to find the Triforce and save Zelda from Ganon with the Master Sword. The obscure entries are a big part of what sets Zelda apart from other fantasy things like Lord of the Thrones or Game of the Rings. And last, but literally not least, I'd like to discuss the one thing you've been assuming I discuss at some point in this video. The sequel to Breath of the Wild. We don't yet know where Breath of the Wild falls on the timeline. There's recovered memory that implies it's the child era, the Korok suggests they may have accomplished that thing in the adult era, and it takes place in a ravaged Hyrule like in the Fall timeline with the original, which it's kind of meant to be a reimagining of. And Age of Calamity didn't really clear things up in either direction for me. So as for Breath of the Wild 2, Death of the Mild, I remember people were labeling it as the next Majora's Mask because they saw Malice and Zombie Ganon and spooky backmasked voices and thought, oh, spooky. But A, there are other spooky Zeldas, and B, spookiness is not the only thing that makes Majora, Majora. The surrealistically symbolic story, the 3-day cycle, the emphasis on side quests, and the total absence of these things. The sequel to Breath of the Wild is not the next Majora's Mask, but it is the next Breath of the Wild. And it does look awesome, and they even said it's the darkest, spookiest one yet, so that's awesome. It's gonna feature the same world, presumably heavily altered, with the skies explorable for Link and the underground explorable for Zelda, presuming she's playable. So here's a quick list of other stuff I'd love to see in it.
It's never frickin' happening.
God damn it!
I never played Zelda as a kid. I know, it sucks. I met Link in Smash 64, and I even mained him in Melee for a while. I remember observing and reading the series trophies and being really intrigued and loving the art design. But I never liked fantasy, and I couldn't look past that. So I eventually just forgot about it when I stopped gaming altogether as I got older. But when I was 18 and my love for gaming rekindled, I asked a few friends, the internet, and the guy at GameStop, I want to finally start playing Zelda. What game should I start with?
The answer invariably comes back.
Ocarina of Time. So I bought it, I played it, and I loved it. I still love it. I wish I played it as a child. I mean, I had the greatest childhood ever, but to think it could have actually been better? But I'm also glad I didn't, because it's still a little bit fresh to me. And I love it so much that I feel like it was always a part of my life. And that feeling has grown to encompass the entire series.
In the end, you'll still just be a shut-in gamer geek.
Whatever happens, it's bound to be great. The Legend of Zelda has one of the richest pedigrees in gaming, and each game is like an event. A generation-defining masterpiece. So just as its past and its present, the future of Zelda is sure to be legendary.